This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, July 10th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate your staying with us on Africa 54. We begin our broadcast with a barrage of COVID-19 cases that are engulfing the United States. U.S. officials are reporting that more than 64,000 infections swept across the nation Thursday, a record number overwhelming intensive care units in hospitals in America's hard-hit West and South, including the states of Arizona, California, Florida, and Texas. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease official, is urging governors to delay their reopening plans. Johns Hopkins University reported early Friday that there are more than 12 million global cases of coronavirus. More than 3 million of those infections are in the U.S. President Donald Trump continues to push for the country's schools to open in the coming weeks, but many questions remain about how safe the openings will be for the students and adult school personnel. The World Health Organization now says the airborne spread of COVID-19, particularly in specific indoor locations such as crowded and inadequately ventilated spaces over a prolonged period of time with infected persons, cannot be ruled out. Turning to the continent, Africa could have a COVID-19 vaccine in the first quarter of 2021 if human trials underway in South Africa succeed, according to Shabil Mahdi, professor of vaccinology at the University of Witwatersrand, who is leading the trial. The experimental vaccine is one of 19 being tested on humans worldwide in a race to halt a pandemic that has killed over 500,000 people, according to Reuters. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is warning that the threat of COVID-19 overwhelming Africa's healthcare system is escalating. David Doyle reports.
With more than 500,000 infections, the number of cases recently doubling in more than a third of countries, and a death toll higher than the world's worst Ebola epidemic, the World Health Organization is warning that the threat of COVID-19 overwhelming Africa's healthcare systems is escalating. Up until now, the continent has largely been spared the worst of the global pandemic, but WHO Africa Director Matshidiso Moeti warned with countries easing lockdown measures, there has been a spike in cases.
So both about the public health interventions to stop the spike in cases after the easing of the lockdowns, it is people who are going to make the difference, and they need to understand. I need to know that it's in my interest and in the interest of my family to take on certain very difficult actions. And I think whatever can be done to inform people, to clarify their misunderstandings, both about the physical distancing and about a vaccine. It is very important that we invest in this.
The United Nations body said 22 countries have seen COVID-19 infections more than double over the past month, and fatalities have now passed 11,308, the death toll in the 2014 to 2016 Ebola outbreak. The continent's worst affected country, South Africa, saw nearly 65,000 new infections over the past week, an increase of 43%. That's propelled South Africa, with more than 215,000 cases, to among the top 15 countries affected globally, overtaking Turkey, Germany and France. Other countries reporting a large number of infections include Nigeria, Ghana, Algeria and Cameroon. Though the WHO added that the acceleration is not uniform, with some countries witnessing low growth rates and others reporting a downward trend over the past month. However, there are also fears that the true scale of infections is not known. That's partly due to a lack of testing. Analysis of Africa's CDC figures suggests 4,200 tests per million people have been carried out on the continent, compared with 7,650 in Asia and 74,255 in Europe. But there are also allegations that some countries are preventing information from being made public. Tanzania, for example, has not published nationwide figures since May the 8th, though the government denies it is withholding information.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. New guidelines introduced this week by United States Immigration will require international students to leave the U.S. if they do not attend class on campus in person. But students already in America on F-1 visas will face challenges trying to go home amid a global pandemic. Isha Sarai explains.
International students who stayed in the U.S. as their classes moved online amid the COVID-19 pandemic may be forced to leave, following guidelines the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement says it issued due to the pandemic.
I don't want to put my family at risk. I don't want to put myself at risk to travel during a pandemic and going back to Pakistan. And even if I could defer the program for a year, there's no guarantee that I will get the visa again.
Many students say they need to be in the U.S. for more than attending class.
As a PhD student, the library is an extremely important resource for us. And as it is because of COVID, those services have been disrupted.
The decision comes after universities moved to remote learning in March to protect students from the pandemic. International students had to decide to stay or return to their families.
More than 90% of the students, international students who were studying in the U.S. when COVID-19 hit and college campuses were closed, have chosen to remain in the United States. And this creates such disruption in their lives and such uncertainty that it is unconscionable.
Students outside the United States say the new ruling has disrupted their plans to return.
I know for a fact that international students, when it comes to rules, guidelines, laws, and stuff like that, they are sort of like treated as low-level citizens, if I can even use the word citizen to begin with, because that's what they make clear we are not.
The Trump administration said this week that the policy speaks for itself and that online coursework does not merit a visa. But critics say the decision will hurt U.S. higher education, economy, and diplomacy.
There doesn't seem to be any rationale behind this. It's not going to protect the health and safety of individuals. It's not going to serve the American economy in any way, especially given the fact that $40 billion in revenue comes from international students. 5.5% of enrollment in colleges and universities is made up of international students.
Harvard and MIT have filed a lawsuit challenging the guidelines, and other institutions and organizations are expected to follow. As students await these decisions and universities scramble to change their fall programming, their future remains in limbo. Isha Sarai, VOA News, Washington.
A large mural dedicated to the Black Lives Matter movement has been completed in New York City's Harlem neighborhood. The mural is part of the famous 125th Street in the heart of the historically African-American district. There are plans for similar works of art celebrating racial justice to appear in each of New York City's 5 boroughs. Nina Vishneva has the story, narrated by Anna Rice.
Despite the sweltering summer heat, the work on this large mural in New York's Harlem doesn't stop.
I wanted to show my son how to be involved in the issues that matter.
18-month-old Emerson is the youngest artist here in Harlem. He watches his mother, Kelsey Harrow, together with other activists, paint the road in the heart of New York's Harlem. They are finishing the large mural dedicated to the Black Lives Matter movement and racial justice.
It represents the past, the present, and going into the future. The reflection of them two together and him ascending to her with the wings open is paying homage to the names and the unarmed people that were murdered by the police that I'm stenciling in the chenille here on the ground.
Large Black Lives Matter murals are set to appear on streets of all 5 New York boroughs. Activists and civil organizations took care of paints and brushes, letting artists do their job.
Important time as ever to continue to fight for liberation as a community, and I think celebrating the joy of artists. Harlem is a place full of history and present artists.
The murals are a result of the mass protests sparked by the death of George Floyd while in custody. The demonstrations took place across the nation and around the world. A new wave of protests spilled onto Harlem streets in the form of paint.
The 4 badge numbers of the officers, and I put a little red line through them. And I also took the 846, and that was the time of one of the officers had his knee on his neck.
Mayor Bill de Blasio emphasized the importance of such art projects and said projects like the one in Harlem demonstrate the city's support for the Black Lives Matter movement. Another large mural will appear in the heart of Manhattan in front of Trump Tower in mid-July. But not everyone agrees it is a good idea.
Is going to put Black Lives Matter in front and Trump Tower and use taxpayer money to pay for it. He is making a political statement, and he's even admitted it, geared entirely to antagonize the president.
Street art has turned into a socio-political protest. Streets turned into a canvas. Artists in New York City are determined to make city streets display new colors. For Nina Vishnova in New York, Anna Rice, VOA News.
Beginning Monday at the Oaklawn Cemetery in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the city, along with the University of Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey, will conduct a test excavation at a site as part of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre graves investigation. Researchers believe the site has the potential to be the location where African American victims from the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre are buried. The test site was chosen based on oral histories passed down and results from ground-penetrating radar that discovered an anomaly. International Edition host Steve Miller spoke with Scott Ellsworth, a professor in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies at the University of Michigan and part of the DIG team, about the project.
So what we'll do is we're gonna take a small area in the middle, about 6 feet by 8 feet. We're going to excavate down, first using a backhoe for the first few feet, and then by hand. And we're going to go down and see if this anomaly, number one, is indeed human remains or not. Then we'll see what condition they're in. I mean, there could be, they could be in great condition, they could be in very poor condition. And then we will see if we can determine whether these human remains are indeed related to the race massacre, whether we have a high degree of confidence that they are. So that is really the goal, coming up here right now. If we do find remains and we are convinced or feel fairly solidly that these are race massacre remains, we will then go ahead and stop at that point. We will cover up the hole and then await approval for the next step.
How big a team are we talking in terms of carrying out this investigation?
Well, that's a great question, and that is, we had originally planned to do this in April, right before the pandemic hit. So our team is smaller, but it's still pretty good size. I would imagine there'll be a dozen of us off and on over the course of the excavation that's within the enclosed area.
And that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I mean, Oklahoma has seen a surge in cases as of late. So while you have a smaller number of people participating in the dig, what other precautions are you taking?
Well, quite a few, actually. So I'll be arriving, back home in Tulsa on Sunday night. And the first thing that'll happen when I check into the hotel is that I will be tested for COVID by a member of the Tulsa Fire Department. We will all wear protective gear, PPE. We'll all follow, safe distancing guidelines, all of that. So it's everyone is hyper aware of that, and that's why the number of people allowed inside this area has been very highly controlled and reduced.
Speaking of being able to keep physical distance while carrying out this work, does that inhibit or make things more difficult because you can't get as close to one another while you are researching this area?
I would say, yeah, I think it'll slow us down a bit. No question. It's certainly after we get, through these first few 2 or 3 feet that'll be excavated, mechanically. After that, it's going to be people using trowels by hand. So that's going to go slow. But that kind of work is done carefully and slow as well. So yes, I think we would have more people in the hole under normal circumstances than we will now. But, this is, there's a deep commitment. Nobody's getting paid for this. This is a deep commitment that all of the professionals, the archaeologists, the forensic anthropologists, and others, people from the medical examiner's office are there. We consider this to be, almost sacred work, and people are going to do it very carefully anyway.
How important is it to carry out this investigation of the mass graves for the 1921 massacre? Because here we are 99 years later, and still not much is known about the event.
Well, it's hugely important, and it's hugely important to remember that these individuals that we think are here, if not they're elsewhere, these were largely African-American massacre victims that were buried while their loved ones were being held under armed guard at various internment camps during the city. Martial law was declared near the end of the massacre. The National Guard troops came in, and they had a problem. They had a problem with these bodies, what they're going to do with them, but rather to do the humane things, have people come and identify these individuals, these bodies. Instead, they just decided that they were going to bury them. And they weren't going to mark the graves either. They weren't going to tell anyone, where they were. So these are individuals who were all murder victims, by the way, who were literally thrown away. And this is in part for the families, certainly, who lost loved ones, to see if they can find out what happened to the remains of their loved ones. But it's also an opportunity for the city of Tulsa and for the nation as a whole, really to welcome these people back, to say these were victims of this horrific incident, and if we can identify them, we will. But most importantly, we are going to be able to rebury them with honor.
That was Steve Miller speaking with Scott Ellsworth, a professor at the University of Michigan and author of Death in the Promised Land, a detailed account of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. We are excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on VOAAfrica.com. Coming up, a young Rwandan musician releases his debut album with a call to bring culture back to its roots. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Lenore Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
Let us be perfectly clear. All countries.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there is no information or evidence suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted by mosquitoes.
There are 2 published studies.
It is a respiratory virus which spreads primarily through droplets, generated when an infected person coughs or sneezes, or through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose.
This happens during pandemics in the past.
For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. U.S. congressional Democrats are continuing to push for answers on news media reports that Russia paid bounties to Taliban-linked militants for the death of American troops in Afghanistan. Those reports that President Donald Trump and some Republicans say are unverified are highlighting the difficulty of confronting Russia in an election year. VOA's Catherine Gibson has more.
I also want to make clear the following.
The nation's top defense official on Capitol Hill Thursday telling lawmakers in precise language he had not seen intelligence warning Russia was specifically paying bounties for the death of U.S. troops in Afghanistan.
To the best of my recollection, I have not received a briefing that included the word bounty. If it was a credible report, that's important, a credible corroborated report that used those words, certainly it would have been brought to my attention by the chain of command, by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others for action.
Esper later admitted he had been briefed on Russian payments in intelligence not corroborated by the Department of Defense. The administration has been careful to make these distinctions. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo denied congressional Democrats' request to testify on exactly what the administration knew and how it will respond.
Why has Russia faced no consequences, not even a public rebuke from the Trump administration?
President Trump has tweeted those reports were a hoax, and the White House has claimed the intelligence did not reach the president because it was not fully verified, a justification that has received pushback from intelligence experts.
Even if it was only vaguely clear from the raw intelligence that the Russians might be paying bounties for the killing of American soldiers, that information would have made its way to the highest levels of the United States government, including the president.
Lawmakers have since received briefings on the intelligence, but because of security concerns have had to be careful responding to questions about its verification.
There are a number of questions here, and some of those questions we know the answer more clearly than others. I personally have no doubt that Russia is attempting to cause us trouble, to reduce U.S. credibility all around the world.
The former top U.S. commander in Afghanistan told lawmakers President Trump's response to Russia should be clear.
We should suspend any troop withdrawals from Germany. These troop withdrawals play into Russian desires to undermine and weaken NATO. If carried out despite these bounties, this will be viewed as a sign of American weakness in the face of Russian threats.
It's not known if U.S. troops died because of the possible bounties. Analysts warned that regardless of the veracity of the reports, Russian leader Vladimir Putin will be carefully watching the U.S. response.
The fact that we've been discussing this underscores the point that we need to recalibrate our posture towards Russia across the whole spectrum.
A discussion delayed in the United States until the election settles who will occupy the White House next year. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
In our entertainment segment, due to the global COVID-19 pandemic, most live concerts and tours are no longer possible for musical artists worldwide. Many of them still continue creating new music at home and in recording studios. Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa, brings us news of a new album release of exciting neo-traditional music from Rwanda. She joins the artist Munyakazi virtually from Kigali to learn more about his album, his Inanga Afrofusion style, and what it means for Rwanda's traditional culture.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Dale. How are you?
Hello, Maxwell. How are you doing?
Fine, yes. So tell me about your debut album.
Well, my album is named Isoko Dusanje, which simply means our common source. It's about bringing back the culture, back to the roots, to the basics, the essence, and stand for the legacy.
I see. Let's just watch together and listen to one of the tracks on your album that I really love. It's, I think, the newest video release from one of the tracks. Oh, yeah.
Umuganda wagenze gute mbese mwawukoreye he nge nari mu gatenga gutunganya umuhanda watwawe n'isu. Twitabira umuganda is my fusion of inanga with different musical instruments, which gives the diversity of the real African music. Umuganda is a monthly collective work where people gather and work together, and I believe it's a huge contribution to the nation.
I remember that work day when I was in Rwanda several years ago. I was there on that Saturday, and it was very impressive. I really enjoyed seeing that happening. But what I like about your video are a lot of things. It has a real inclusiveness about it. So you have a female playing the saxophone in a jazzy style. You have different kinds of instruments, traditional instruments like the calabash, the inanga, of course, which is yours, specialty. And there's the djembe. You even have some people with disabilities in the video. And then it's also funny because you have people hiding who are lazy, I guess, that don't want to work. Tell me, how does that happen actually during COVID right now? How are people managing with the workday? Is that still happening on Saturday? Are people wearing masks?
Well, wearing mask is a must, of course. And unfortunately, nowadays we are not attending the Umuganda because of keeping social distance measures as the way of overcoming the coronavirus. I think when the corona is over, we gotta do it again.
Your love and passion for this instrument, inanga, and cultural traditions in general is really strong. It shines through, and it always has. I've been following your work for several years now. What is the main source, do you think, behind this passion of yours?
My inspiration is from my ancestors. I'm following their footsteps of standing for the legacy and keeping alive our real African music, our folk music. And people used to think that the inanga or traditional music is being played by old people, and I wanted to sustain my culture by following the legacy of my ancestors. So I'm here to stand for the legacy, and I will keep pushing till the whole universe know that inanga is from Rwanda.
Your album is now released, and we're still under pandemic restrictions, of course, so you can't perform live yet. But what are your plans in, say, the next year?
Well, so far, I'm promoting the album. You can find it on different social media and on digital platforms like Amazon, iTunes, and especially on Bandcamp. And I'm grateful it's training worldwide. And after this, I will be having a short break to think about what to do the next and get energy of doing the second album. And I will be attending different festivals around the world. Many projects on the way. Please get ready.
That's fantastic. Deo, thank you so much for joining me, and best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
That was Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa, feeling the vibe with Rwandan artist Munyakazi Deo. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.